Welcome everyone to the another episode of the Any War Game Anytime podcast. I'm Daniel, and I'm as always joined by Sam. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Daniel.
All right, and we've got a special guest, one of the masters himself, Lex. How are you, man?
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming on to our fledgling podcast, our expert podcast that we know what we're doing, right? So
Exactly. We're 100% certified experts, not just a bunch of guys sharing our opinion.
that's right. That's right. Sam did get our podcast certification from some website that we'll send you. We'll send you the screenshot. Someplace in India, they wanted our social security number, and we gave it to them, and yeah, it's great.
What could go wrong?
All right. Well, we with Masters going on, we're really happy to get Lex on. We'd love to get his perspective. I don't know, me and Sam, we did our little analysis where we just kind of looked at the numbers, but the numbers can lie. It's good to get a person who he put in the work. He made the cut, and he went up to Masters and he competed. So we'd love to kind of get his perspective on it today. So with that, let's start out with some of the Lex. How was Masters? Was it fun? What did you think about it?
I had a great time, actually. Despite the record, I think you could get sour about games that if you didn't do very well and let that affect you too much. But because I had 6 really good opponents that I enjoyed playing, and because I was sharing an Airbnb with a couple of my Texas teammates and the Lair guys, and we had a really, really good time. So yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think on Facebook, on the South Team Masters forum, I said, and Omaha was surprisingly better than I thought it would be. And everyone thought that was funny. And now that's the new tagline for Omaha, apparently. Surprisingly better than I thought it would be. But it was, food was all good. We had a lot of good restaurants. We ate at, I guess, the Omaha's famous steakhouse, and went to the zoo and did fun things in Omaha. But yeah, I had a blast at Masters. I definitely did.
That's really good. Really good. Yeah, it's I think that me and Sam are kind of just it's geeking out. Just we're kind of living vicariously through you, just to kind of go to Masters seems like such an awesome thing. I guess the next, yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like, maybe this is good sports. How did you feel? Just, it's obviously very highly competitive, but did you feel that that people were still good sports? Did you have do you think that was a problem?
There were 0 issues in any of my games when it came to rules disputes or anything like that. I mean, anything that we had, we worked out. I think there was one question that had come up in another game that could have come up in my game, and Adam quickly resolved that, and it wasn't like a point of contention or anything. It was resolved quickly. Yeah, and everybody was great, and I enjoyed all of my opponents. I think they must have had a good time playing me too. I did notice my sportsmanship was the best thing I had going for me there for sure. I think I was tied for 3rd, but I lost the tiebreaker, which was battle, of course. So, didn't quite make the cut to get a sportsmanship award, but they must have enjoyed playing me too, because that went pretty well.
Lex, you kind of let me down in my prediction here. I think on both of the one we did, and then the other, the Texas Masters poll, I think I picked you to win.
Well, there were a lot of people, and they did this to me at the last Masters that I managed to attend when I was doing Forces of the Abyss. A lot of people were labeling me as their dark horse or whatever, and didn't come through on that one either. So maybe that's a curse to be labeled that way. No, but yeah, I tried my best. I played hard. I thought I was actually like playing at a pretty high level consistently. I can think of maybe one or two times during the course of the tournament where I made a mistake that I could think about. And the rest of the time, I thought I played pretty cleanly and consistently, and it's just the way it went at the end. So nothing else to say about that. I mean, die rolling in a couple of games had something to do with it. I think we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, everyone was a great sport. I think
You have
probably,
like a favorite moment?
yeah, a game that stands out. So I was supposed to be, from what I understand, the only Basilia player in the tournament, right? And no one else had posted the list. And then Grant Feder, I guess he got in because he was a substitute that came from Best of the Rest. And so he came in with a Basilian list that was very similar to mine, but I'm going to have to admit it now, like for everyone to hear, his version was probably a little bit better. He did take Julius, and Julius is a badass, right? And so I had a mirror match against him, and that might have been my favorite game of the tournament, despite the fact I lost it. It was a dominate mission. He got first turn, and then we're so evenly matched that first turn really did help him a lot because he could basically position himself to where if I moved even an inch up, he would have charges everywhere, right? But it was a very tactical game. No big imbalances in terms of luck or army types because it's a mirror match, right? And he's a great guy. So that was a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, yeah, that and I know that is the great thing about I think that's different that I would say this. The reason that I love our community so much is because we can be competitive. We can really play hard, but honestly, we don't there's just not like an attitude like I would say this previous to Kings of War, I came from the War Machine community and it's just very different. Like there's just I don't know, maybe I don't want to say, but it does feel a little bit of like a maturity issue where it's like people just took things a lot more personal. What do you I mean? How about what do you think about that, Lex? Looking from different gaming because you've been in gaming a long time. So
Yeah, I think this is a carryover a little bit from Warhammer Fantasy, probably, but the crowd seems to be a little more easygoing than your 40K crowd or other types of tabletop war games, to where it can be competitive, but people don't get too bent out of shape about it, generally speaking. I mean, occasionally you'll run into that, but not very often. And maybe it is because to some extent sports gets judged and put out there for people to see, and I think that's a good thing. But I just think the crowd, I mean, these are mostly veteran players. Well, at Masters they're all veteran players, but in general in the game we have a lot of players who came from Warhammer Fantasy or other games, so they've been doing it a long time. And yeah, I very rarely have a problem with any opponent that I play against.
It's
yeah,
also
yeah.
a very welcoming community too, which I've always which one of the reasons. So I also play Warhammer Fantasy, and then I had gotten out of Warhammer Fantasy kind of prior to the destruction of Warhammer Fantasy, and I came back to Kings of War because it was these old the people I played Warhammer Fantasy with. But unlike a lot of other war games that I've looked into, the community was very happy to have new players come and learn. I think that's kind of one of the I know that both me and Daniel have been critical of Kings of War at times, but that we'll point out the good things too. Um, the thing that really got me back into it was easy to come and pick up and learn. The community was really welcoming. I'll always remember my first time going to a GT. Uh, my car broke down the day before, and I was going to have to cancel. And so I posted this kind of long sob story on Facebook, and within 2 minutes, I had multiple people messaging me, offering me a ride, a room, you know, come play. And that's a huge thing for me. That's one of the reasons I still care about this game and this community as much as I do, because I remember that.
Mhm.
A little tangent
Yeah,
there, but I thought it was, you know,
no, I mean
worth pointing out.
it's something that I think I value as well. I have come from I was in 40K tournaments for a while. I was in War Machine and just, I believe me, having a good community is a big bonus to the game. So yeah, yeah. Well, so we've had all our nice questions here. Lex, we're gonna start getting in some of the harder ones. So Lex, the terrain and the scenarios from a balance perspective, what did you think from our so we did some analytics and it seemed like the terrain was light. Now, one thing we would say is do you think that light terrain necessarily unbalanced the game or the scenarios? What did you kind of think about the terrain scenario combination,
I
in
think
Masters?
off the bat, when he said that there were going to be maps for each scenario, I thought that was a good thing, that all the tables are going to play the same maps. Um, the year before that, when Masters was in Seattle, they had the maps, but they had put those maps and made them public so everybody knew what the maps were going to look like. The Masters this year, that was not the case. So the maps were basically held back until the time of the game, right? It wasn't so much that the terrain was light, although it was, especially the height zero terrain ponds and stuff like that. It opened a lot of shooting lanes, and certainly a lot of maps had hills and deployment zones. So it did create an advantage for shooting heavy armies, without a doubt.
Okay. Okay. And do you yeah, it's a real fascinating thing when we talk about terrain because it's this it's such a huge factor in the game, right? And would you prefer to have pre-placed terrain or would you prefer to have player placed terrain? And
No, I
what
would
why do
not prefer player placed terrain.
okay,
I
okay,
think
fair
player
enough.
placed terrain often results in a nearly unplayable board sometimes, where you have this line of stuff across the center, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
prefer, if they're going to do maps, which I actually think is a good idea, to have predetermined maps and then every table sets up that map. Thought that was a brilliant idea. I just wish they would have released the maps along with a
Yeah.
pretty accurate representation of terrain size when they released the maps, all before lists were due, because I have a feeling a lot of people would have chosen very different kinds of lists if they would
Mhm.
have seen what that was going to look like.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, so it's easy to say the terrain was light. Maybe there's just the practical side of there's only so much terrain. Would you be, because I know coming from War Machine, we played on just flat plastic cheap stuff, you know. Would you do you like is that something that you really do prefer to have the cinematic nice looking boards? Or would you in a tournament, especially like Masters, really be okay with playing just with flat plastic or felt terrain where you could also the cost isn't so prohibitive but it does maybe give you more terrain. What do you how do you kind of fall on that?
I think for casual games, playing with whatever kind of terrain you have is fine. I think for larger tournaments and certainly for Masters, I mean, the cinematic aspect of it is part of the reason people play.
Mhm.
I'm not as into it as some people are, but some people visually, if they don't have something that stimulates them, they're not so much into the game. I like it. I like really cool terrain and good setups and nicely painted armies. I could also play on a bunch of, cutouts, and that would be fine with me too. But I can understand how that motivates some people to want to play more. And certainly I can get into the game more probably when there's really nice terrain laid out. That wasn't a prohibitive thing, I don't think, for Masters. I mean, they did have to make a lot of terrain at the last minute,
Mhm.
but they did manage to to make enough terrain. It was just, I guess, the questionable part was the size of some of the pieces and then the layout of some of the boards.
Okay, well, cool. So from terrain, so let's talk about another thing that me and Sam started digging into in our research, and we don't have the answers. This is just a clue, was about scenarios. And sometimes we get so caught up in the armies. We said, look at this army is powerful, but again, one of those things is scenarios. And like how like do you feel just the because you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, played the base scenarios. And how do
We
you
did.
feel about the balance of those like base scenarios? Kind of
Well, they sent out a survey that let us basically choose the scenarios that we wanted to play. And they did that region by region until they got a consensus over which scenarios would be dropped out of play. And none of the ones that were dropped out of play surprised me whatsoever. So the two of them that have bluff tokens were dropped out. So no fool's gold, no smoke and mirrors, those were gone. And I think the feeling on those is they're just too random sometimes, and you can't ever really be sure if you're going for this and then that's going to be right. So it's just sometimes a guessing game. The other one that got dropped out is push. And I know exactly why that one got dropped out, because that one is very unfair depending on the kind of army you go against. Who wants to see a wilt father across the table from you in a push scenario when they're going to, move up 10 inches and then be impossible to kill and they're holding all 3 tokens? Of any scenario in the game, that's the one that I would rework. Certainly, I don't think a unit should be able to carry more than 1 token in that scenario. That would probably do a lot to help. And I don't think a unit should be able to scout in that scenario. That would probably also do a lot to help. So you have 2 advantages there, I think, for certain kinds of armies.
The other fixes I've seen to loot token scenarios put around is cap the amount of loot tokens you can have based on your unit strength, right? So the Will Father, right, has could hold 1 token, but can't hold all 3. But a large infantry horde could, which makes a little bit more sense. I think that's a middle ground.
Definitely.
Between those, but there are ways to make that more equitable. I definitely think.
Okay, fair. All right, well, and that's good to know that about, because I think sometimes the conversation does switch to a lot of armies, and the scenarios, like I said, the scenarios ultimately drive what sort of armies are being played. And so it's very good, I think, to get some pretty good feedback about, hey, maybe we do need to make some adjustments on these scenarios. What about just fairness overall? So, when you look at Masters, and it's a very broad question, and we'll kind of let you answer it however you want to, but just fairness overall at Masters. Did you feel you had a fair shot?
Yes, I do in general feel like I had a fair shot. And I think if questions emerge about that, it's going to be about the terrain and not really knowing what it was. So maybe more transparency would have made it come across as being even more fair than it actually was. And also the app that we used, trying to remember what it was called, Tabletop Score. That app, when you enter in your results on it, don't give you what your actual points were that you earned for the game. And then you don't see those really when they make the next pair up for it. And there were issues with that app during the course of the weekend. So a lot of times we had no idea where we really stood, and some matchups were given, but then were taken away and we were given a different opponent. And it made some people wonder, well, why are we given this different opponent, right? So it raises questions. But I feel that overall it was fair. I think Adam is very fair in how he runs things. I think everyone realizes that app is probably not going to work for future events. This is 2 times we've tried to use it, and 2 times where the results have not been great using this app. And I think most people that do even just a little bit on whether it's Google Sheets or whatever it happens to be, say, hey, I could do a better job on Google Sheets, and feel that would be a better application of it. But yeah, this goes a little bit into the next question. We talk a little bit about armies and some of them being stronger, some of them being weaker at any time during the game. In the top 15 people that scored in battle at Masters, there were 12 different factions, which is pretty impressive, right? That 12 different factions made it into the top 15. And then, of course, the big shocker to everybody was the winner, that Trident Realms took the day and won Masters overall. Nobody would have seen that coming. If people would have been making bets on that prior to the event, I don't think anybody would have put money on that one.
Absolutely not. No.
No.
I
So
saw that. Yeah.
Matchups have a lot to do with it. It is still very much a rock, paper, scissors game, and your matchups can make or break you through the course of an event. A little bit of luck can make or break you, right? I don't think anybody who's ever won Masters would say they did it without any luck here or there too. So all of those things come into play, and it's never going to be completely 100% fair across the board. But yeah, overall, it was a fairly run tournament.
And that is great to hear, because I know it's easy for us to start when we're talking about criticizing. Let's also recognize that how probably difficult it is to run this and how much pressure. And despite all of that, I think you coming on here and saying it was fair, right? And that the people who won, it's fair. And I think we have to give, Adam, and Adam's been great. He helped us with our little survey. And I think that is a testament that sometimes we can get so caught up in the minutia and the details that it's good to hear someone who's there, who you didn't do great, right? If am I correct or wrong? If any person could maybe complain and say, "Oh, it's unfair," and I didn't do, for you to just come out and say it's fair, right? I think that is a testament that let's not get caught up in all the weeds to recognize that we. Right? Hey, is that kind of correct, Lex? Kind of saying that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the people who will complain the loudest will be those that did the worst, generally speaking, right? So maybe if you would have asked me immediately after, when I was still stinging from the wounds of the game, that I might have a different answer. No, probably not. Because I did have a great time, and really I can see things that I could have done better. And then obviously luck was a factor in some of the games. It is what it is, and if I did it all over again, I'm not sure the result would necessarily be any different if someone else was running it, or if it was a different kind of terrain on the table. It may all end up exactly the same way. I thought it was fair as other tournaments that I go to, generally speaking. So I had no problems with the way it was run overall.
It's good to hear. Good to hear.
So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I agree with the statement that I think overall Kings of War, even today, is a pretty well balanced game. That doesn't mean it can't be better, and I'm going to push back a little bit here, just because I think someone has to. And
we gotta get spicy. Let's get spicy.
Gotta get spicy, right? Yeah.
Well, keep in mind, I was addressing this specific tournament, not talking about the game overall.
That's true. And one of the things I would really like to do going forward, and I think one of Daniel and my goals going forward, is to kind of collect more analytic data from other GTs, not just Masters, and kind of see where some of the issues are on the broader kind of side of the game. And the other thing, I really wish we had in Kings of War, and I think you touched on this a little bit, Lex, with the map packs and such for the games. One of the things that I wish we had in Kings of War is sorry, the doorbell rang. We don't really have a standardized tournament packet in Kings of War, and kind of a standardized of these are the kind of competitive things that are done in GTs. There's a lot of
Nope.
trying to think of the word. A lot of unclear stuff in regards to things like disengage and withdraw. The optional rules. Terrain. One of the things I think that would be a really useful thing going forward in Kings of War is to kind of have a more standardized tournament packet. You can kind of know what to expect a little more when you go to a GT, and you're gonna know what you get.
I'm not sure if we want it to be 100% standardized, because each GT does have its own little flavor.
100%, yeah,
special characters, things like that. But transparency would be really good. Because then people know exactly what they're getting into. I really like the idea of pre-made maps, releasing those in the beginning. I like the idea, and what most tournaments have been doing, of going down through the lists and putting all the lists in Dropbox, so you know what lists are out there, who you're playing, that kind of stuff. Transparency makes people confident that they're playing in a fair system, right? Or will be fairly treated at the tournament when everything is very open and clear.
Yeah, and I will I'll kind of if there's one thing I will agree but also disagree on your point, Lex, about terrain. I prefer player-based terrain. I think it can produce wonky results, but it's results that two players, to me, I think that's one of the most strategic parts of the game, is player-placed terrain, and it will produce wonky stuff, but it will also be that true. I think that's how you really get fairness, is when two players effectively pick 50% of the terrain. And I think that on the previous podcast, I think Tom Anna said it best. He's like, you place a hill on your deployment, someone places a forest right in front of it. But I would say I will agree with you, Lex, on this part. If we are going to do pre-placed terrain, it all needs to be upfront and shown in advance. Because
I think there's going to have to be an extended set of rules associated with player-placed terrain as well. You can't just have standard terrain placement rules. You're going to have to expand on that a little bit, or you are going to have some really wonky tables and maybe a little bit of unfairness in how some of the terrain gets placed for certain types of armies. Like, say you are playing loot or some token scenario like that, right? You could put a building with an army that doesn't have any flying units right in the way of a token. You have flying units, you're able to reach it, they're not able to reach it, right? There's a lot of little things like that can happen with player-placed terrain, so there would have to be some restrictions, I think, before I would be on board with that.
I
and
agree.
That's fair. And that's that's fair. I definitely think we should have an expanded one. Like I said, my personal opinion, I found the games that I play where I place terrain, I feel at the very least, because we were able to counter it, I feel those are more fair. But I will agree with Lex. I will say that I think that I definitely agree with you that player placed, like, predetermined terrain is fine, but you're right, there needs to be that transparency, because there's always some, especially Masters, there's always something on the back of your mind saying that, what about players who get there early and look at the terrain beforehand, right? Or maybe they know the sort of terrain that's going to be set up beforehand, right? That's a big deal, by the way, right? If we're really talking about this, they're just, when it's all up front, I feel there is that level playing field, right, Lex?
Yeah, I agree. Transparency, having it up front, knowing what it is. And the maps at Masters, so they weren't released ahead of time, right, this time around, and they brought them around to the tables at roughly the same time. But then, like you said, there were one or two times where I was already at the table when the map went down and my opponent wasn't there yet, or vice versa, right? So you are getting a little bit of time, as I started setting up according to the new map, to kind of study the terrain and get an idea of how I might play it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I went to Lone Wolf this past year, I'll be completely upfront. Like, on Friday night, I was going through the tables, and I was just basically looking at every one of the tables, and I was kind of notating, okay, this is the terrain on each of the table, this is here. And that's just something, like I said, that it's something to keep in mind. But let's go, because I think that we're starting to hit that point that I think Sam's ready to go. We're all ready to go. And Lex, how do
I
you...
had things come up today, unfortunately, that that are gonna pull me away here soon.
That's fair. Well, Lex, overall balance of Kings of War. We're not talking about Masters. Let's just take a step back. Overall balance. What do you feel?
I think there's obviously work that still needs to be done. There is two kinds of balance the way that I look at it. There's balance that is within a list and balance between lists, right? When we're talking about point costs of different units. So there's two ways to really look at that. Clearly, there are some armies that currently are not very competitive. Although, looking at the fact that there were 12 different armies in the top 15 at Masters, it shows that there is at least a decent amount of parity within the game right now. But a lot of those armies, I don't know if they're very competitive and probably could use a little bit of reworking in order to make them so. Do we really want a game that's 100% balanced? Some people push for that. That would mean that every army has access to all the same toys and the same things. Does anybody really want to play that game? I'm not sure. Having the different factions and different abilities is kind of part of what gives it its flavor, but we can certainly push towards making it a little bit more balanced. There's probably too many lists, to be honest. What do we have now? 25, 26, 28 lists now.
Yeah, and
And
there's gonna be more soon, right?
and more soon. Yeah. When's the last time you played against Ratkin slaves?
Never.
Okay, yeah. My point exactly, and I can name,
or free dwarves, or
free dwarves, right?
I haven't played against League of Roidia really since second edition.
Yeah, it's been a while. So there's probably a lot of consolidation that could be done to clean that up a bit. Some of these lists that could probably be dropped to make room for the new ones that will be coming in. And yeah, balance overall, I think we'll wait and see what happens in December when the next Clash comes out. That's December, right? When that's supposed to happen.
Right.
And we'll see what happens there. Obviously, they can't address everything in a Clash. But from what I'm understanding, I'm kind of liking the direction they're going and a lot of the things that they've done so far. So I'll have to wait and see on that on the balance front. I guess I'm lucky with the balance thing. I'm not a one army person, right? I think I have 11 fully painted armies at this point that I can pull out. So whatever direction the game goes in, I'm kind of like Johnny on the spot with army ready to go. So that makes it a little easier for me.
That's a very good point. That I think it's funny because I was thinking about this too, that balance is a lot more, I guess for me, I really have two armies. I play dwarfs, but I don't really like them. The problem for me is that the dwarfs that I have that I want to play aren't in the meta. And it's kind of like, so I don't really play dwarfs. And my Kingdoms of Men, which I love, I think that when we start talking about balance, it's very subjective. But yeah, what do you think about, because I think that we can get caught up in the people who have 10, 11 armies, but vast majority of Kings of War players, maybe 1 to 2, and probably one really good painted army, right? Maybe that's where we are disconnecting sometimes. Some of the players who get frustrated because they really only have one well-painted army versus probably the perspective of players that have 10 or 15 who could basically be like, oh, I'm going to switch to this and move things around. So what do you feel about that? Because I think you're hitting on a really good point that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought it up, because I'm advantaged in that way, I guess you could say, because I do have access to all these different things that I can pull out if I need to. If one of my factions starts to decline and how good it is out on the battlefield, I have other ones that I can turn to. I don't know if there are that many that just have one army, but maybe there are two, three armies. But maybe you're right. There's one really well painted army that they'd really like to put out there, and that would be their main army. So yeah,
The other issue with this is if you're it takes a lot of resources, both time and money, to build and paint an army, right? And so one of the things I think that if you're not sure, okay, well, am I going to spend you know several $100s and a whole bunch of hours assembling and painting this army? I kind of want to know that it's going to be there and competitive and in a good spot, for when I get that done, right? It's a long process, and that I think ties into this as well. I mean, that's kind of one of the things I've been critical of recently is like, I'm not sure where the game is going sometimes when I look at how things are being done. And I get that there's going to be some kind of correction when Clash comes. One of the things I originally liked about Kings of War was, okay, we had the rules, we had all the books, it was 2 books, you got all the army lists.
Yeah.
Back when I started, and then there was a yearly Clash, and so you knew that, okay, this year I'm going to have access to this stuff, and that's going to be static. I understand what the meta is limited, in that regard. So if I want to devote a time and energy into a project, I know that's going to be there. But they kind of moved away from that this last year with like, okay, let's just release things more intermittently. We're gonna this month we're gonna have the new Night Stalkers army,
Yeah.
and that's gonna come out, and then a couple months later we're gonna have the new Northern Alliance army, and are they gonna continue this trend? And if
good
so,
question.
I mean, that's kind of something I want to know as a
Hmm.
consumer. Are they going to continue doing that? Because that makes me kind of a lot less inclined to want to devote time and energy to a project when, okay, well, in a couple months they're going to release a new army and it's going to have all these new things. I mean, I was working on ogres, quite honestly, before until the new Night Stalkers launched, and I got really annoyed over some of the stuff that are the Night Stalkers list. It's like, okay, well, they just get better boomers,
Well, the ogres are still a pretty good counter to Night Stalkers, generally
yeah,
speaking, I
they
think so.
they still are, but it's like I got kind of turned off a little bit because, like, okay, well, I've
Mhm.
been working on this army, and now I kind of wish that I had been doing something else, and
Yeah.
So
And I see your point, and I think it's a good question because I'm not sure if anybody that I've talked to really knows what the plan is, right? Like when is all of this, how is it supposed to work now? Because it does seem very piecemeal. We don't really understand the plan. Um, and I did like it better when it was a continuation of the same, and it was going to be edition, then clash, then maybe another clash before the next edition, and we knew
yeah.
how it was all set up ahead of time and how we could plan around that. And they do seem to have gotten away from that. Um, Again, if they were just more upfront about it, right? And
That's
we
right.
had to set dates and they showed us how it was all going to work. That would make it a lot easier on us as consumers and players to figure out how we want to approach the game.
Yeah, for me, I am not gonna try to get, it's so easy to get caught up in each individual thing. I would say broadly, what I felt the messaging is changed is I feel the messaging is two different places. One, that first of all, they're saying, we've put our rules, we've put our army list digitally now. Now we can make updates constantly. That was something that was pushed to us as a community. And they've they've leveraged that on certain armies. They've said, we're going to add Night Stalkers and we're going to add this army and we're going to be able to get the rules out there quicker. And that seems to be what they pitched to us by this whole digital thing, constant thing. But then the other side of it is to the other armies that aren't the ones picked by Mantic, the models, they say you've got to wait to the end of the year. So it feels like they're trying to, they've pitched to us this, oh look, we've made it digital, updates can come anytime,
Yeah,
And yet
a living
they
rules
tell
system.
us, but if you're not one of the armies we're working on, you're just gonna have to wait till the end of the year. And it feels like, I mean, if they can do these constant updates, I would hope, and maybe I'm wrong, this is something new. Let's give them a chance. But I would say I would hope that they start doing that with all the armies, right? To say, because to me, I don't see the big deal. And how about just pushing see, for me, I come from much more of the agile world and development where you just push something out to the public and you have them test publicly, right? Instead of saying, well, we've got to keep all this stuff here and we've got to try and figure out within this small group. I think that's going to be a better way. But yeah, so to me, that's the frustrating thing is that on one hand, we get oh, look, we're going to be able to be agile now, but it's just really certain armies. And then all the rest of the armies, you're going to have to wait to the end of the year. So, and I hope that can change. I'm hoping this is just temporary. And so, yeah, that's just, like I said, it's just a frustrating part on my end, I would say.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes after December and
Yeah.
the next Clash comes out, if that is going to continue to be the way things are done, or if
And
some
it could
kind of
change.
schedule will be followed after that.
Yeah, let's give them a chance. I think that there's nothing wrong with this is something new. Maybe that's what it is. Hey, this is something new they're trying, and they're still working out the kinks. And if it's that, then I fully applaud it and I fully support it. So, okay. What about rules? So, you're like me and Sam, Lex, you've kind of been in this road from the beginning. Any particular rules that just, I know I've got my double ones, it's just my pet peeve, but
No, it's not just your pet peeve. That's going to be the first one on my list. So
okay. Oh, wow. Well,
I'll
okay.
talk about the double ones for sure. Back in the Warhammer Fantasy days, right? If you threw enough resources into a unit, you're going to be removing that unit from play. So you would never be rolling a break test against that unit, right? Double ones is far more significant in this game than it was in Warhammer Fantasy because you don't remove that unit, right? You can do 30 wounds to something that has 12 nerve, doesn't matter, double ones, they stay there. And now you're opened up for these flanks or whatever else is going to happen that's terrible after you roll these double ones. No, I don't like the double ones rule as it is. It seems to happen. I don't know if that's just my perspective, but it seems to happen a lot more often than odds should dictate that it would happen.
Statistically, you are correct. It does happen. I ran the numbers. I think in a 6-game tournament, you will run, I think it's between a 40 to 60% chance that you will roll a double ones when it's necessary. It actually is pretty statistically relevant.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's not like, and I think that the defenders of double ones have said, and I think you and I have talked about this a little bit, Lex. The defenders of double ones want to keep it because it's like, oh well, it's this kind of chaos of the battlefield, the unit holding against all odds. And one of the things I think in Kings of War, and I agree, I agree, and you and I have discussed this before, is like, well, you've already rolled 30 dice to hit and wound them, right? So you've already had that ability to have that kind of swingy, result. Okay, well, you rolled 30 dice. Oh, only did 8 wounds. That's represents the unit holding, holding against this kind of force that they shouldn't have been able to. So why do you need to also have then double ones to
Yeah.
further that?
And after you roll that 30 dice, or whatever it is that you're rolling before that break test, all of that luck, whether it was good or bad, of that 30 can just be swept away by the roll of this one pair of dice, right? Whether you did really well and put 1,000,000 wounds on them or did very poorly, you could go boxcars, you could go double one. So all that came before is now no longer important to the result of what happens once you roll. The best solution to me is the simplest solution, and I'll call it the John Hoge roll, right? With the 3d6, remove the center. It's an elegant, simple solution that works because the probability then be go to 1 in 216. Is that right? Chance of rolling double ones rather than 1 in 36. So it would greatly decrease the likelihood that you will roll with that system. And it's very simplistic and one that everybody could follow pretty easily, and it would be a simple fix.
What? So
I would
for
be
me,
fine with
and
getting rid of the rule altogether too.
yeah,
But if I were
well,
compromising with people that want to keep it because they still want that element, I say, okay, well, we can keep that element, but we're going to reduce the probability a bit.
well, can't we just have it both ways? Like, this is where I think tournament packs come into play. In casual games, let people roll double ones. It's fun, right? In a casual game, wow. I mean, you're playing casually, you're going to laugh, you're going to have a great time, right? It's so fun, you know. But when you do start getting to masters, you know, perhaps
You're just in a
people,
larger GT, right? If you're
right, could
trying to get to masters because you're, you know,
right. I think that, you know, why can't we just have a tournament pack that say in this sort of masters, and then let people continue to have their fun, right? Hey, play double ones. It is very enjoyable. Um, that's just my kind of 2 cents on it. But okay, double ones off the we're taking that out, Lex. What else, game designer Lex? What else are we doing?
Well, there are some inconsistencies within the game that I'd like to see cleaned up. One of the ones that confuses people all the time, and I have to go back and look at quite often, is the 1 inch rule, when it applies, when it doesn't apply, because it's not uniform. You know, if you overrun, does the 1 inch rule apply? The answer is no, right? You can move all the way up against a unit and be adjacent to it. But then other times when you move, it applies. So why is it necessary? That would be my first question. Why is that a rule that we have to have in the game? Is it just for the look that we're separating the units so you can tell they're not, you know, together? What is the reasoning behind it? And then if we are going to have it, why is it applied so inconsistently? That would be my questions about the double ones rule. And I don't have a good solution for that one, more like questions of why we have the 1 inch rule in there.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good one. And it would, yeah.
I'd be remiss if I don't get to use this opportunity to talk about my least favorite role rule of the entire game, which is the roll for turn 7. I absolutely despise the way the turn 7 is done.
I don't have a problem with it necessarily. It does make people play differently when they don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, well, on my survey, because I did your survey, right, I was asked about how often, I remember how you guys phrased it, turn 7 determine the outcome of the game. And for me at Masters, that was 0. In general, it's pretty low for me when I'm playing. But then again, a lot of my lists are very aggressive, combat heavy lists that are usually going to be made, or, you know, either make or break the game by turn 3 or 4, or they're just not going to win, right? It's going to be one way or the other. So it might be the nature of the lists I play where my outcomes are going to be determined before a turn 7, possibly.
So the other issue with not just determining the outcome on turn 7 is I've been in scenarios where I won my games, but the game ended in turn 6, and a turn 7 I'm going to win by, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 more points, and that matters in a larger tournament.
Sure.
You know, I was at a tournament where I day 1 all 3 of my games ended on turn 6, and I had basically tabled all of my opponents by that point, but they ended on turn 6. And on a turn 7, I would have been able to, okay, well, I could move and claim this extra objective or whatever. And it was like, well, that would have been, you know, 2 or 3 more points in each of those games. And, you know, I'm not trying to justify my standings or anything. Like I did very well that tournament, but it's one of those things that I think gets passed by because in one of scenarios it's not that big a deal. But the turn 7 roll becomes a bigger issue in a larger tournament, which is
possibly,
again, I think,
possibly could be an issue.
That's possibly, and that's my hypothesis anyway, right? And that would be my hypothesis.
Perception is, I mean, perception is reality, and that's a thing that perhaps there are people. I'd say it this way: whenever we talk about tournaments, I would go back to what Lex is saying. it's easy sometimes to get perspective from players who play in 5 or 6 tournaments a year, right? Oh, I had this tournament and double ones or turn 7 messed me up. Oh, I did bad this tournament. But there's a lot of players in this game. In fact, I think the plurality of players go to maybe 1 to 2 tournaments a year, right? And for them, I know I can only speak for myself. I only get a chance to go to 1 GT a year. And so for me, when I do have those turn 7 games, the impact is much larger on me. Do you know what I mean? Like I only get to one. And I remember those games. I remember those games that, man, this one. And I guess for those players, maybe this is just different perspective, right? Players who don't get to go to these tournaments, when those turn 7 happens, I would say it's much more visceral. What do you think about that, Lex? I mean, maybe it balances out in the end, but some players don't get that aggregate, right?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to really thinking hard about an example I can think of where a game 7, there may have been 1 or 2 I can think of where, I mean, game 7, turn 7 possibly gave me a win that I may not have had otherwise, not at Masters, but in other games I've played in tournaments. But it doesn't seem like it's come up that much for me personally to where it's been that big of a deal. And I'd kind of like the idea of the random not knowing, because you can't play your last turn as if there are no consequences for it, right? Because sometimes people will do some obviously silly stuff to where, okay, I need this token, I can move this character or this unit and turn my rear to these siege breakers because they won't be able to charge me because this is turn
Yeah.
6, right? And do some things that would be silly
Yeah,
like
but
that.
but then if they win,
But
then if they win the 4-up roll, then they just win, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I have a problem with that, because I've had that. I feel like I've had that come up to me a lot where oh yeah, I'm gonna just put all the tokens in my goblin on a chariot here and give you an easy rear. So if you get a turn 7, you completely, 100% win. But
sure.
if it's if I don't, then I win. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that boiled our whole game down to a single 50-50 chance. Like
Possibly.
we could
I
have
wouldn't
saved
have a problem
time
with
and
going
flipped a
back to
coin.
6 turns either. I'm not married to the turn 7 possibility roll or anything like that. I would say for me, a bigger issue would be figuring out a way that you could strike a little bit more of a balance with the advantage that the first player receives, especially on a lot of scenarios. There's obviously a huge advantage to going first. How many scenarios do people choose not to go first? Very, very few, right? Maybe if they're one of those armies with a zillion wind blasts, they might choose to go second so they can blow you off all the objectives or something. But generally speaking, you want to go first. And there's been some reasonably good ideas about that too, like maybe with invade or loot. The army that goes first, you basically move the center line 3 inches back towards the army that goes second, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense to you. And
Yeah.
that creates a
Yeah.
little bit of balance.
Yeah. I think, and turn 7, I'm not gonna die on fighting on that hill. I'm not quite as adamant as Sam. It's an
Okay,
annoyance to me.
that's
I think that for me there are bigger fish to fry with turn 7. But I think to me it's something that I would love us to experiment on. Let's have a tournament where they set the turn and let's just see what happens. I don't know. But I do agree. I think at the choosing, I think to me, roll like I'm interested especially in the choosing sides as a single roll and going first. I wish we could balance out because that is completely random. And that does, from what we've initially saw, have a big impact on the game. And how could we mitigate these two basically single dice rolls, right? That have a heavy impact. That's actually something that I like that you're here talking more about
Well, that is another
yeah.
suggestion someone brought up was that if you win the roll for sides, then you automatically, if you choose the side, you automatically forfeit first turn.
yeah.
I don't know if that's a great idea or not, but it's something that could be experimented with and, get an idea on if those two things are roughly equal enough of an advantage to balance it out if it was done that way. That might be a simpler solution than moving the center line 3 inches. For some people, they may not want to have to do that for an invade or loot scenario or something along those lines. Certainly, it makes a lot more of a difference in some scenarios, right? To have that first turn advantage. In some scenarios, like invade, especially, right? That could make or break the entire game.
Yeah. And I think that's why we started out talking about the scenarios, because when we really start getting into balance, sometimes there are just, at least from what we're gathering from you, Lex, there are some scenarios that just need to get reworked. And maybe it's not a turn one going first. Maybe it's just the actual scenario, right?
Yeah. I think they could be reworked, to be fair. I do think most of them are generally speaking pretty fair, but may have some advantage for sure with the first player, but they could be reworked in order to be a little bit more neutral and a little bit more fair. And that's something that could be experimented with.
Yeah. Okay. So, kind of last question we had in our docket, and we'll just kind of give you, after this question, we'll just kind of give you your general thoughts. So just overall, just suggestions. How do we make Kingdoms of War better? Is there any, just, you can talk about balance, kind of open-ended. What do you think just Kings of War, what are your just kind of suggestions? What are your thoughts?
Overall, I would say I've been overall fairly happy with the game as a replacement for what I enjoyed so much before, which was Warhammer Fantasy, right? It always is going to get compared to Warhammer Fantasy, and that's probably never going to end as long as there are old people like me who used to play fantasy for so long are going to draw
people like us,
I think that's everybody in this call.
Pretty much, right? So it's always going to have those kinds of comparisons to it, and I still will die on this hill that so far, from what I've seen, it has been an overall a better game than Fantasy was when we left it, right? Fantasy was in a pretty bad state, in my opinion, when we left it. It had gotten to this horrific build stubborn hordes and roll box cars with a spell in order to win the game type of situation that it was in 8th edition. And this game has been a lot better than that. There are always things that we can do to improve the game for sure. I think we need to keep working on building a better community, a bigger community too. Probably Mantic could do a little more to push out events that would help recruit people and bring them into the store. And they've done some of that recently, right? But we need to continue to do more of that. And we probably all could pick up our part in that too. Because if it's just going to be a bunch of us old players who were still playing that were left over from Warhammer Fantasy, this game isn't going to last all that long, right? We're going to have to get fresh new blood in here as well to continue to grow the game. And if we grow the game, that automatically fixes some of the other issues that we have up, because we'll see a number of new players coming in who will want different things, including the ability to play whatever armies that they are really into. Manic will have to be focused a little bit more on game balance. If it's not a bunch of veterans like me that have 11 painted armies they can field, and they're having to cater to all these new people coming in, they're just going to have one.
Well, I think one of the big strengths of Kings of War in terms of getting new players is that when we set up and play, it looks really cool.
It does.
So we're constantly getting, people walking by in the store. Oh, wow, what's this? This looks so awesome. You've got these huge armies of fantasy creatures, and what is the game? And I don't think I've pretty much every time I go and play Kings of War game, somebody comes up and says something like that.
Agreed.
And
they're amazed. It's just amazed look on there. It's like they almost are afraid to come next to the table, because they're like, oh, they have this kind of shy look about them.
But that's
the multi-basing is a part of that for sure, because in Warhammer, when you had these giant dead piles right over at the side, it didn't look nearly as pretty as when you have nice clean units. But I think the multi-basing lends to the visual effect for sure.
Yeah. Well, just the fact that you can have really big armies too, right? You can have kind of a full board full of terrain and units, and that's been a strength of Kings of War. And I would like to see Mantic delve into that strength a little bit, and in terms of like let's make the game more accessible to the people who come up and maybe they're
Yeah.
not veteran war gamers like all of us here, us old fogies here. But I started playing Warhammer Fantasy when I was 15. And I would love to see a push towards making the game and balancing it in such a way that a 15-year-old could come in and get some blank bases, or play a game, decide they like it, and okay, well I'm gonna buy this unit and start filling out their army. I mean, that's
why blank bases? Why not paper? I mean, this is something that OPR I'm seeing is doing so great, is the push for paper models. Like I would love to see that. That's another thing that me and Sam were even looking into, to support some paper models, to be able to, if a new player comes up, here are some paper models that have paper bases. Here, play us a game. We're not handing some total stranger our nicely painted army, right? Let's try to find ways as well. And I think paper models from OPR, it's a smart idea to maybe as a community provide some of these paper armies, to where I've had so many 13, 14, 15-year-olds who ask me, how do I get into this game? And I wish I could just hand them some paper models, say, here, start playing, I don't know. So, okay. Well, Lex, we appreciate you coming on. Anything else that you just want to kind of end with here?
You got like 30 seconds to get your spiel out, and
give you the floor.
Say
Lex.
whatever.
What do you think?
I have no agenda. I have no spiel. I will just say it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. We'll keep on hammering down there at Dragon's Lair and enjoying ourselves. And for anybody who's listening to this out there, whoever the 3 or 4 of you might be, come down and visit us at Dragon's Lair. I'll plug that part, right? If you're here in Texas, that's open to anyone, and we can always use the numbers. So every third Sunday of the month, that is our tournament time.
Nice. And it is great. I do want to shout out to Chris as well, who's really held this community together. We're very fortunate in Austin to have not only people, but a lot of really good players. We're really blessed in Austin as well. So thanks, Lex, and we'll join you guys next time. Thanks so much.
All right, it's been a pleasure.